continuing now with our messages in this series on the path of wonder, the Meditator's Guide to Advent, to this season of holy days leading up to Christmas, recognizing the birth of the Christ consciousness that is to occur within us all. So a little story about Mary this morning. Let's begin with a quote from the Gospel of Luke, 2nd chapter, verse 28. And the angel came to her and said, "Greetings." In other words, pay attention. Greetings. Pay attention, you who are highly favored. In this gospel story of the birth of Jesus, the young girl, Mary, receives this strange greeting from an angel. She's not addressed as Mary, but is called highly favored and one who is blessed among women. Well, her reaction, of course, is, "That's strange." And then it gets even stranger. She's told, "You will give birth to a son who will be called the Son of God." Oh, she doesn't faint or argue, but I think it's good to note that she doesn't agree either. She basically says, "Wait a minute, hold on." And then she says, "How's this supposed to work?" And she could have added, "Hey, this is not my plan. This is not what, Joseph and I, who are just engaged, had planned for our lives. It's not how I thought things would be." So I want to say that, when you study scripture and if you want to look at the metaphysical meaning and how it can apply to your life, it's very helpful to enter these tension points in the story. So that tension point is a very good point for us to enter the story and learn from it. Here we are. In a sense, her experience is familiar. Life is certainly not how we planned, especially right now. And we have a very profound question, which is, how is this going to work? Mary's life is going to change, and she will have to change, and she does. Her strategy is strategy number 3 in our 3 strategies from the Kriya Yoga guidebook for awakened living, and that strategy is surrender. She doesn't know how it's going to work out. It's terrifying. And yet, because it comes to her as pure inspiration, it's also awe-inspiring and soul-quickening for her. So her strategy is, okay, I don't know what to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to serve the highest good. Let me do what will serve God. And we can all do that in any given moment. We can all offer that. Let me do what's going to serve the highest good. Let me serve God right now. So that's Mary's approach to the fearful unknown, is to let go of struggling against it and to lean into the moment. So most of us recognize surrender as this practice of letting go of the idea of separate self. But we sometimes forget to attach that what is the most important benefit for us of that, which is, of course, awakening. But with that awakening comes discovering divine support. We don't know how we're going to get through this. What we most need is divine support. So when we let go of trying to control what we cannot control, when we release the struggle, we enter the fullness of the moment with all its complexity and all of its mystery. Mary is called favored and highly blessed. Then she renames herself servant of the Lord, one who cooperates with reality. And this is a capital R, reality, this awesome nature of the divine life. So she takes on a new spiritual identity, a new consciousness. Then when she goes to visit her cousin Elizabeth, her presence, Mary's presence, stirs the baby in her cousin's womb. When Mary comes in and she greets Elizabeth, Elizabeth feels the baby turn inside of her. This is a beautiful story. When we are awake, when we're anchored in the spiritual truth of our being, transmission of that spiritual truth occurs. So the life within Elizabeth moves, stirs, and that's what it's like to be with someone who's spiritually awake. We're raised up from our ordinary consciousness, and new life stirs in us. That was my experience with being with my guru, Roy Eugene Davis. I would come to him with problems to be solved, usually a long list, but when I sat with him, they would vanish. Sometimes I would try to hold on to them because I had this experience many times. So I would try to hold on to them, but my problems and difficulties would not be accessible to me. They would vanish. Now, it's not because those problems or difficulties, in a sense, had gone away. They didn't magically disappear because he walked in the room or because I sat down with him. What happened then? Well, when I was in his presence, I was reminded. And there was transmission, and I connected with myself, capital S self, my higher true self, and my consciousness was raised to a higher level. I was no longer then consumed by my thoughts, by my worries, by my desires, abiding in my essence of being. I experienced this expansion of possibility. When Mary asked the angel, how is this all going to work out? The angel told her, with God, all things are possible. So the angel, metaphysically is our higher awareness. It's our intuition. It's our higher mind that says, with God, all things are possible. When we raise our consciousness to abide in, to be aware of, to be anchored in our essential self, we taste that possibility and we know it. We experience it. We're not, when this happens, it's not that we're suddenly flooded with creative ways to work out our problems. And this is an important distinction. What happens instead is that we are free from holding the way that things are as a problem. We're free from holding life as a problem, no matter how difficult it is. And surely it is right now. We no longer hold it that way. Instead, we're anchored in our divine resourcefulness. And we feel that and we experience it when we touch reality. Capital R, reality, the sense of divine support, of resourcefulness and abundant grace is palpable to us. We feel it. We experience the ground of our being as infinitely supportive. This week, I've been contemplating the Nativity Scene. I set one up in the bay window in our dining area. And as I did, I noticed how the curved shape of every piece in the design is molded, in a sense, to face the Christ child at the center. And all parts of the self have a place in that scene. The animals are lower instinctual drives. The shepherds are devotion, our intuition. The wise men are awakened discernment. Joseph, the protector of new life. Mary, the surrendered, awakened heart. The Christ child, which is the divine self, the cosmic Christ, the divine self of all. So think about the classic paintings or the simple creche scenes that you have seen, representing this hologram of the self with the light of love at the center, pulling, in a sense, pulling all parts toward itself that are pulled towards it, adoring it, captured by it, just as we are pulled by the soul toward the Lord of love within us. I've never seen a nativity scene with parts being distracted, like no one's hanging out in the back of the nativity scene, looking around for something interesting. No one's checking a cell phone or looking bored. Even the animals are not wandering off. This is the image of a meditating mind. This is the image of a meditating mind. All the components of the self are lined up in harmony, its wholeness. There's a focus at the center. Now, one prominent character in the story is missing from the nativity. Not because he doesn't want to be there. He wants to be there, and he even asks for an invitation. But the wise ones, awakened buddhi, awakened faculty of discernment, turn away from him and don't tell him where the Christ center is. The missing one is, of course, King Herod, or King Ego, the one who says he wants to worship the child but lies about it. So when we think about it metaphysically, to understand it, it's that it isn't possible for ego to be there because the nativity is a symbol of wholeness. Metaphysically, as yogis, we could understand it as a representation of samadhi, the direct experience of reality, of the divine self. And samadhi means to hold together completely. It is conscious wholeness. So since ego gives rise to the sense of separate self, it can't enter wholeness. Or another way to say it or to understand it is that when ego comes upon wholeness, it disappears. The separate, quote unquote, I, the separate I or the false self no longer exists. Now, we do not cease to exist in the experience of samadhi, but the sense of being separate from God, the sense of being separate from reality or from others ceases, and only wholeness, only consciousness remains. So with this wholeness, all elements of the self are in the right place, in right relationship to one another, to the divine self, to the Christ light at the center of being. This is Ananda, or bliss, which is joy and peace that emanates from the experience of pure love and clarity. Clarity. The perfect joy of self-knowing. When we are distracted from the truth of our being, we wander in sorrow. When we reconnect with the truth of our being, we have that joy of knowing the truth, being able to be anchored in it. And in that wholeness is our new identity. And there is our healing. So how does that work? Well, healing is the nature of consciousness, is the nature of the self. There was a seeker who once asked the Indian sage Nisargadatta Maharaj, he said, when a man comes to you for advice and you give it to him, where does this advice come from and by what power does it help? Nisargadatta replied, his own being affects his mind and induces a response. His own being affects his mind and induces a response. So the devotee asks, well, then what is your role? The sage says, in me, the man and his self come together. The next question the devotee asks, which is a familiar one, is well, then why does he have to come here? Why doesn't he just get help from within? And Nisargadatta says because he won't listen, because his mind is turned outward. The attitude is faulty and needs readjustment. This readjustment is what you call sadhana. So back to the nativity. Think about this story. Everyone, all the components of the scene journey to arrive there. So this timeless question, why do we have to journey to arrive at awareness of what is already present? Well, because we forget, we get distracted, we get caught up in fear. So we journey to remember, and our journey is our sadhana. During this time, that forgetfulness is our greatest challenge. And sometimes it causes us to neglect our sadhana. You know, when we need our spiritual practice the most, we put it off. Kriya Yoga sadhana, Kriya Yoga practice is simple. 3 things. Be disciplined. Have a regular schedule. Meditate every day. Get enough sleep. Eat healthy meals, same time each day. Give structure to your life that feels so out of control. You control that part of it as much as you can. Meditate every day. Bring some discipline to your life. Study. Take in the reminders of spiritual consciousness and surrender. Lean into divine support by deciding to serve life right now, wherever you are. Just decide that you will let go of worrying how it's all going to come out and do what you know you can do in this moment to serve life. Let go of trying to control the future and instead enter into the present, into the presence, into the direct experience of life, which is awesome, which is overflowing with divine love. Om.